Since January 2024, over 6,000 jobs in Canada's education sector have vanished. Not relocated, not outsourced. Gone, and not just any jobs. These were careers, built over decades. Professionals in international recruitment, admissions, teaching, language training, people who helped define Canada as a global education destination. Now, they're unemployed. Not because they failed, but because the system collapsed. In early 2024, the federal government made a sudden move. It announced sweeping restrictions on international student visas. Overnight, the number of study permits was slashed by nearly 50%. The reason? A housing crisis. The message was clear. Foreign students were taking up too much space, straining resources, driving up rents. So, the government pulled the brakes. But in doing so, it crashed a sector that had become vital to Canada's economy and to its identity. Canada's international education industry wasn't just a nice-to-have, it was a $22 billion economic pillar, larger than forestry, on par with auto manufacturing. And many schools, especially colleges in smaller cities, relied heavily on international tuition. It helped fund programs for local students. It kept campuses alive. Without those students, programs were cut. Entire campuses scaled down. Jobs, gone. This wasn't a slow decline. It was a collapse. The damage is already staggering. Mohawk College in Ontario laid off 450 people. The University of Windsor, over 150. In Manitoba, a language school shut down, and with it, much of the province's ESL ecosystem collapsed. But here's the strange thing, even as thousands lose their jobs, many schools stay silent. They downplay the losses. They avoid headlines. Why? Because to admit the scale of this collapse is to admit the system was built on a fragile foundation. For years, international students were sold a dream: come to Canada, get a quality education, build a future. And for many, it was true. But, behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Private colleges with questionable credentials, agents recruiting students not for learning, but for labor, a federal system overwhelmed by its own growth. Yet instead of tightening oversight, Ottawa did something easier. It cut the pipeline. And the result? Legitimate colleges are bleeding out, while the real abusers pivot elsewhere. So did this policy fix housing? Not even close. In fact, it made things worse. The people now unemployed, the teachers, administrators, service workers, they're renters too. Losing 6,000 middle-class jobs doesn't solve a housing crisis, it feeds it. This wasn't surgery, it was an amputation, and the body is still bleeding. Let's not forget who built this system. The thousands of education workers who spent decades crafting Canada's reputation. Who traveled the world, forging partnerships, who created safe, supportive, welcoming environments for international students. They weren't scammers, they weren't part of the problem, they were the solution. And now many of them are gone, laid off, silenced, forgotten. The truth is, Canada never had a housing problem caused by students. It had a policy vacuum, it had a leadership failure. Canada now finds itself in a dangerous paradox. We're in desperate need of skilled workers. We're facing labor shortages in healthcare, tech, and trades, and yet, we're gutting the very system that trains them. We told the world, come to Canada, learn, stay, and now we're saying, actually, never mind. What message does that send? But here's the thing. This collapse isn't irreversible. We can rebuild, smarter, fairer, stronger. We can tighten oversight. We can close loopholes. We can invest in housing, without scapegoating students. But first, we have to acknowledge the damage. We have to say the quiet part out loud, that thousands of honest professionals have been sacrificed, that the system failed them, and that silence is no longer an option. If you're one of the thousands affected by this collapse, if you've taught, recruited, guided, or supported students from around the world, this story is yours, and it deserves to be told. If this video helped you understand what's really happening in Canada's education sector, please like the video to help others see it. Subscribe for more honest, in-depth coverage of the stories no one else is telling. And tell us in the comments, were you affected by the collapse? Do you think the system can recover? We read every response. Thanks for watching.